Arthur's Family Truth. The bank manager didn't touch the paperwork. She looked at the screen once, then at me. "Sir," she said quietly, "this account is flagged." I didn't react. Everything in the room stayed normal. No alarms, no one looking over. But something about the way she said it didn't match what I was seeing. Then she added one more line, lower this time. "Access has been frozen." I kept my hands on the table. Because I already knew one thing, there was only one person who could have gotten into that account. And the problem was, I hadn't said her name out loud yet, because once I did, everything would change. So I didn't. Not yet. The account wasn't the beginning. It was the first thing that didn't hide itself. The real problem had been sitting there a long time. I just hadn't recognized it yet. My father didn't waste words. If he said something once, it meant you were supposed to remember it. He had a rule. Measure twice. Cut once. I thought it was about work. I didn't realize he was warning me about something else. After the funeral, we went back to the house. Everyone moved the way people do when something ends, quiet, organized, already thinking ahead. Faye didn't ask questions. She didn't slow down. She just started sorting things, like she already knew what mattered. I drifted into the garage. That was where Dad really lived. Everything had its place. Tools older than me, hardware sorted by size, nothing there was random. If something was out of place, he would have noticed. On the top shelf, there was a stack of old notebooks. Most of it looked like clutter, the kind of thing you throw out without thinking. I almost did. But I thought of what he'd said, the old green notebook. I pulled the stack down and went through it slowly. Third one from the bottom, green cover, spine cracked, pages stiff. When I opened it, a small leather-bound passbook fell out and landed flat on the workbench. Edges worn with age, the kind of thing banks haven't issued in years. I picked it up and brought it inside. Faye was in the kitchen when I set it on the counter. She glanced at it. Maybe 2 seconds, no more. "That's no good," she said. "Those old accounts don't exist anymore." She picked it up and dropped it straight into the kitchen trash, right on top of paper plates and napkins from the funeral catering. Didn't pause, didn't ask what it was, just gone. I stood there looking at the trash can. If it was really nothing, why was she so fast about it? That night I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet in a way that felt wrong. I kept hearing his voice in my head. Measure twice. At 4:30 in the morning, I got up, walked into the kitchen, and pulled the passbook out of the trash. Tucked into the back cover was a folded slip of paper, and underneath it 6 words in my father's handwriting. I read them twice before I understood what they meant. "Don't ask your wife. Go to the bank." I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, just me and that piece of paper and the sound of the refrigerator humming. My father didn't write things he didn't mean. If he left those words there, they mattered. Especially that one. "Don't ask your wife." By 9 of that morning, I was in the truck. The drive to Millbrook was just under 2 hours. I turned the radio off after about 10 minutes. I needed quiet. I needed to think. I kept replaying the morning in my head. The way Faye had picked up that passbook and dropped it in the trash without blinking. No hesitation. No curiosity. Most people, you hand them something old and unfamiliar. They at least look at it for a second. She didn't. She already knew what she wanted to do with it before she touched it. That bothered me more the longer I drove. My father wasn't the kind of man who hid things without a reason. He wasn't paranoid. He wasn't dramatic. He was the most straightforward person I've ever known. If he wrote "Don't ask your wife" on a piece of paper and tucked it into a notebook on a shelf, he'd thought about it. Probably for a long time. That's how Earl Mercer did everything, slowly, carefully, and only once he was sure. Halfway there, my phone rang. Faye, I let it ring twice before I picked up. "Where are you?" she asked. Not upset. Too calm, actually. "Running an errand," I said. "Took the morning off." A pause. Short, but I noticed it. "You didn't take anything from the house, did you? From your dad's place?" "Just some old shop manuals from the garage," I said. "Nothing worth anything." Another pause. "Okay, just checking. Gavin mentioned we should keep everything together until we figure out the estate. You know how complicated these things get." I said I understood. We hung up. I put the phone in the cup holder and kept driving. About 9 hours later, almost to the minute, my phone buzzed again. Not a call this time. A text from Gavin. "Just checking in, brother. Hope you're holding up okay. These things take it out of you. Let me know if you need anything." I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the seat. 2 contacts, perfectly spaced, both saying different things that meant the same thing. "Stop, come back, leave it alone, My hands tightened on the wheel. I kept driving. Millbrook is the kind of town that still has a diner with handwritten daily specials on a chalkboard by the door. Main Street is 2 blocks long. Everybody waves when you drive past, even if they don't know you. The bank was a small brick building near the end of the main drag, clean, well-kept, American flag out front. The kind of place that feels like it's been there since before you were born and plans to outlast you. I pushed through the glass door and got in line behind a woman depositing checks from what looked like a bake sale fundraiser. When it was my turn, I slid the passbook across the counter along with my driver's license and Dad's death certificate. The young teller smiled, typed in the account number, and waited. Her smile faded. She looked at the screen, looked back at me, looked at the screen again. "1 moment, please." She disappeared into the back. I stood at the counter and waited. 5 minutes, then 10. I started to feel like an idiot. Maybe Faye had been right. Maybe this was nothing, a closed account, a dead end, and I'd just driven 2 hours chasing a grieving man's wishful thinking. Maybe the note was nothing more than an old man who'd gotten confused near the end. Then I caught a glimpse of the teller's screen before she'd fully turned it away. 3 words, right in the middle of the display. Account flagged, access frozen. A minute later, a woman came through the door from the back office, dark blazer, mid-50s, gray streaks in her hair. She moved with the kind of calm that tells you she's handled difficult conversations before and doesn't lose sleep over them. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "I'm Dana Alvarez, the branch manager. Would you come with me, please?" Her office was small and quiet, framed certificates on the wall, a plant on the windowsill that had clearly survived a lot. She closed the door behind us, sat down across from me, and laid the passbook flat on the desk between her hands. "This account," she said, "is flagged." "Flagged how?" "Not because of anything you've done," she said quickly, "because of its history." She turned her monitor slightly so I could see rows of numbers and dates going back years. Then she pulled out a notepad, wrote 1 number on it, and slid it across to me. I looked at it. $362,000. "Is that the balance?" I asked. She nodded once. I sat back in my chair. My father, the man who reused envelopes until they fell apart, who resold his own work boots twice before buying new ones, who never once complained about what he didn't have, had quietly set aside $362,000 over the course of 30 years. He'd hidden every dollar of it inside an account no one knew about, and he'd kept it there, untouched, waiting. "There's more," Dana said. She opened a thin folder. Inside were printouts, timestamps, scanned documents, a log of access attempts going back several years. She turned to 1 page in particular and set it in front of me. In 2019, someone had attempted to access the account using power of attorney documents. The paperwork looked legitimate at first glance, but the bank's internal verification system flagged inconsistencies in the signatures. The transfer request was denied. The attempt was logged. I already knew what I was about to hear, but I asked anyway. "Who filed the paperwork?" Dana met my eyes. "Faye Mercer." The room felt smaller. The hum of the air conditioning above us suddenly sounded very loud. I looked down at my hands on the desk, the same hands that had spent 22 years fixing other people's engines, and somehow hadn't seen what was happening right next to me. Dana stood slowly. "I need to make a call," she said. "I'm going to ask you to wait here." She stepped outside. The door clicked shut. I sat alone in that quiet office, staring at the passbook my father had hidden on a shelf in his garage, waiting for it to look like something other than what it was. It didn't. When Dana came back, she wasn't alone. A woman followed her in, plain clothes, hair pulled back, expression sharp but not unkind. She didn't need a uniform. The way she moved told you everything. "I'm Detective Iris Benton," she said, extending her hand. "Financial Crimes Division. We've been aware of this account for some time." We sat down. Dana stayed near the door. Benton asked questions the way experienced people do, calm, specific, unhurried. Who had handled my father's finances over the last several years? Who managed his mail? Who took him to doctor's appointments? Who answered his phone when family called? As she talked, things I'd filed away without thinking about started rearranging themselves in my head. Faye offering to take over Dad's bills after his eyesight got worse. Faye answering when I called his number and then saying he was resting. Faye telling me more than once that Dad had seemed confused lately, that he'd mixed up dates, repeated himself, forgotten conversations. I had believed her. I'd had no reason not to. "Did your father ever seem like he was trying to tell you something?" Benton asked. "Maybe something he couldn't say directly." I thought about that afternoon in the garage, the way he'd stood at the workbench with his hand on the edge of it. not looking at me when he spoke. Checked the shelf, the old green notebook. Not weak, not confused, just careful. He told me where to look, I said. And he told me not to ask my wife. Benton nodded slowly, like she'd heard some version of this before. She leaned forward slightly. Here's what elder financial exploitation usually looks like, she said. It doesn't start with theft. It starts with access. Someone gets close enough to help, and that's genuine at first, sometimes. They manage the appointments, the paperwork, the phone calls. Then slowly, they start managing the information too. They decide what the person knows. They decide what the family hears. By the time any money moves, the groundwork's already been laid for years. She paused. The person being exploited often knows exactly what's happening, but they've been isolated and they've been labeled confused, forgetful, difficult. So when they try to say something, nobody takes it seriously. I sat with that for a moment. He knew, I said. It wasn't a question, he knew, she said. She told me what came next. They were opening a formal investigation. That meant I could not go home and confront Faye. I could not mention the bank, the account, any of it. If Faye or Gavin suspected what was being looked at, they would move fast, delete records, transfer files, get ahead of it. You're asking me to act like nothing happened, I said. For now, she said. Yes. When I walked out of that bank, the afternoon light felt wrong. Too bright. Too ordinary. I sat in the truck for a solid 10 minutes before I turned the key, just sat there with my hands in my lap. Then I drove home. That evening, Faye made dinner and talked about selling some of Dad's old shop equipment. Gavin had a buyer lined up, apparently. She talked about it the same way she talked about everything organized, matter of fact, already 3 steps ahead. I watched her hands while she spoke. Steady, completely steady. I said as little as I could without it being obvious. Short answers, nodded when it made sense. After dinner, I went out to the garage and sat on the tailgate of my truck for a while, just thinking. I started keeping a notepad in the truck's center console. Every evening I'd write down what was said, by who and when, exact words where I could remember them, dates, times. It felt strange at first, but my father had done the same thing, and he'd been right too. The days that followed were the hardest part, not because anything dramatic happened, because nothing did. Faye acted completely normal. Gavin texted once to ask how I was holding up. I replied and kept it short. Every morning I got up, went to the garage, worked on cars, came home. Every night I wrote in the notepad. On the 4th day, Faye asked me over dinner if I'd gone back to the bank at all, to deal with estate paperwork, she said. Her tone was light, casual. Not yet, I said. Probably next week. She nodded and changed the subject. But I noticed she didn't bring up Gavin handling the paperwork that time. She just let it go. That was new. 8 days after the bank, Neil Krause called. He introduced himself as my father's attorney, said they'd worked together for nearly 20 years. Dad had left instructions. Neil was only to contact me after the bank had confirmed I'd come in with the passbook. Not before. Not if I'd found it and walked away. Only if I followed through. Neil's office looked exactly like you'd expect a 76-year-old attorney's office to look. Dark wood shelves bowed under the weight of binders. Framed diplomas on the wall, slightly crooked. The whole place smelled like old paper and coffee that had been reheated one too many times. Neil himself rose slowly when I walked in, tall, a little stooped, firm handshake. Your father was a careful man, he said, settling back into his chair. He came to me in 2020, told me he believed he was being financially exploited by someone close to him. He had evidence, but he'd already been labeled as confused, and the person telling that story was the same person controlling his daily life. Neil shook his head slowly. Once that narrative sticks, it's very hard to shake. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a thick manila folder. It landed on the desk with a soft, flat weight. He asked me to give you this only after you'd gone to the bank, Neil said. His words were, the boy follows through, or none of this matters. I opened the folder. Inside were bank statements going back years, handwritten notes in Dad's block print, and side-by-side copies of 2 signatures. On the left, his real one, uneven pressure, a slight tremor in the upstroke, the signature of a man in his mid-70s who'd worked with his hands his whole life. On the right, the forged version, smooth, uniform, too clean. He noticed right away. Neil said quietly. He circled it in red ink the same day. Every questionable transaction had a note next to it in Dad's handwriting. Transfer unauthorized, signature mismatch. Confronted, denied, page after page. At the bottom of the folder was a single document notarized, dated 2020. I recognized the handwriting before I read a word of it. I am of sound mind. I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm being financially exploited by a family member. I'm documenting this so the truth will outlive the lies. I had to stop reading for a second. He couldn't fight it while he was alive, so he built something that would fight it after. Neil waited quietly until I looked up. He trusted you to finish it, he said. Detective Benton called 3 days after I met with Neil. We traced the transfers, she said. They don't move directly from your father's accounts. They route through a shell company first. Lander Advisory Group, your brother-in-law's company. I already half expected it. Didn't make it easier to hear. There's more, she said. We pulled emails. We have enough to file for warrants, financial records, electronic devices, office space tied to Gavin's company. I need you to keep doing what you've been doing. Normal, quiet. A few more days. That evening I sat across from Faye at dinner and watched her talk about her week. A work call that ran long, traffic on the 270. A show she wanted to watch later. I nodded in the right places. I asked a follow-up question or two. I did everything a normal husband does on a normal Tuesday. When she went upstairs, I went out to the garage and wrote everything down. 2 nights later, she asked me, almost as an aside, whether I'd heard anything from the bank yet. Estate paperwork, she said. Just wondering. Nothing yet, I said. These things take time, she nodded. Gavin said he could help move things along if you want. He knows people. I'll keep that in mind, I said. I went to bed. I didn't sleep. Benton called at 6:10 in the morning, 4 days later. We're moving today, she said. Simultaneous warrants, 7 a.m. I thought you'd want to know. I was already awake. I'd been lying there for an hour listening to the house. Faye's breathing beside me, a car passing outside. The refrigerator cycling on downstairs. Normal sounds. The last morning they'd sound that way. I got up, got dressed quietly, and went down to the kitchen. Made coffee, sat at the table with both hands around the mug and waited. At 7:03, Benton texted, "We're at your residence. Stand by." I looked at the front door. The house stayed completely still. Faye came downstairs about 20 minutes later, still in her robe, coffee cup in hand. I heard the knock from the kitchen. I didn't move. Benton told me the details later. 2 officers, calm voices. Badges visible. Faye opened the door and went through her layers, the smile first, then confusion, then a kind of controlled offense, like she was the one being wronged. 3 responses, one after the other, practiced and smooth. When the warrant was read out loud, fraud, forgery, elder financial exploitation, the smile stopped. Her face went blank for just a moment. Then the lawyer voice kicked in. Across town, at the same time, officers walked into Gavin's office during a client meeting. He was mid-sentence, hand raised to make a point about long-term growth strategy. The room went quiet when the badges came out. Gavin asked if there'd been some kind of mistake. He mentioned his attorney. The officers weren't interested in either. By 8:30, both of them were in custody. I found out sitting in my truck in the parking lot of a hardware store on the west side, watching a man load bags of mulch into the back of his SUV like it was any other morning. Benton's text came through simple and direct. Done. Both in custody. I sat there for a while. Didn't feel what I expected to feel. Mostly just tired. The trial was methodical. That was the word for it. No dramatic speeches, no raised voices, just a prosecutor laying out a timeline, document by document, date by date. The kind of precision my father would have respected. The bank's forensic analyst testified about signature pressure, how the muscles in your hand create patterns over decades that no forger can fully replicate. She put both signatures up on a screen. Dad's real one on the left, uneven human real. The forged version on the right, too smooth, too consistent. She pointed to a small hesitation in my father's upstroke. This is age, she said. This is real. Then she pointed to the other. This was practiced. Benton testified after that. She explained elder financial exploitation in plain language, how it starts with access, how it builds through isolation, how the victim gets labeled before the money ever moves. These cases don't begin with theft, she told the court. They begin with control. When the emails came in, the room shifted. Phrases read aloud. Move it before he notices. He's not tracking dates anymore. Gavin stared at the table. Faye stared straight ahead. Dad's notarized affidavit was entered into evidence. Neil read it aloud. I'm of sound mind. I know exactly what I'm doing. The room was very quiet when he finished. Sentencing came 3 weeks later. The judge didn't raise his voice either. He said what needed to be said clearly and without theater. This was not an accident. This was not a misunderstanding. This was sustained, deliberate deception of a vulnerable man by people he trusted. Faye, 7 years federal. Full restitution. Assets seized. Gavin, 3 years. Lander Advisory Group dissolved. When the gavel came down, I felt nothing dramatic. Just a door closing softly on something that had been open too long. Outside the courthouse, Benton found me at the top of the steps. Your father would be proud, she said. I wish he didn't have to be, I said. She nodded. Didn't push it. That was the right call. A week after sentencing, Neil called one more time, said Dad had left one more envelope, only to be opened after everything was resolved. I opened it at Neil's desk, 1 page, folded once, Dad's handwriting. Clint, if you're reading this, the truth did what it always does. It waited. I'm sorry I couldn't stop this while I was alive, but I knew you would follow through. Don't let this harden you. Use what's left to build something honest. Measure twice, cut once. I held that letter for a long time before I folded it back up. 6 months later, things are quiet. No court dates, no detectives, no lawyers leaving careful messages. I paid off what needed paying, cleared the mortgage, set aside enough to stop worrying, and then I did something Dad would have understood without explanation. I found a small garage space a few blocks from where he used to work, fixed it up myself over the course of 2 weekends, part repair shop, part community space. I fix appliances and small engines for people who can't afford to replace them. On weekends, I run basic maintenance classes, how to listen to a machine, how to catch a problem before it becomes a breakdown. On the back wall above the main workbench, I hung Dad's old tape measure, the metal edge worn smooth from 40 years of use. Next to it, framed in plain wood, measure twice, cut once. People ask about it sometimes. I tell them it belonged to a man who believed in doing things right, even when no one was watching. He was right about most things. A quiet man who writes things down is more dangerous to a lie than any lawyer in a courtroom. If something in this story sounds familiar, if you've ever been told you were imagining things, that you were overreacting, that it was better not to ask questions, here's what I'd say. Pay attention to what doesn't add up. Write it down, trust patterns, not reassurances. The truth doesn't rush, it just waits. And sometimes it waits in a green notebook on a garage shelf for the one person who bothers to look.